Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Airgap Networks at RSA 2021. My next guest is Mr. Adam Pennington. We're going to talk about MITRE and a ransomware security framework. Mr. Adam Pennington, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to talk about the MITRE and ransomware security framework. But first, let's start out with some street creds, a little background, and what you're doing as the attack lead.
Sure. My name's Adam Pennington. I lead the overall MITRE attack project as well as the team behind it. I've been with MITRE a little under 13 years now, focused on everything from operational security to deception operations. But for the last several years, I've been part of MITRE attack and focused on adversary behaviors, ways we can defend against them, and trying to help the community with MITRE attack. And so attack itself is a knowledge base of adversary behaviors. It's a freely available framework that's available to anyone in the world, open source. It's largely generated by contributors. So people are telling us what they're seeing out there in the real world. We're adding it. We're trying to reflect on it and trying to help people understand different ways that they can defend against those activities. We only cover things that have been done by real adversaries in the wild. We don't focus on red teaming or theoretical vulnerabilities or just threats that people are postulating. It's just things that have been seen somewhere in the wild as we feel that can be an effective way to prioritize based on known real threats.
Well, I love it. This is, data is power and information, and you guys are on the ground seeing what's happening in real time. So who better to comment on the current situation? Let's start real quick with your thoughts on Colonial. I've always waited for this sort of thing to happen. I'm always worried about the infrastructure being affected, the grid and stuff like that. And to me, Colonial was just short of that, right? Maybe they didn't intend it to be the incident they intended, but fallout damage, right? You take away some gas supply lines, and that hurts the little people. What are your thoughts on that? Is this more of a sinister attack that we normally see?
Well, I think a lot of what we seem to be seeing here, based on what we've seen in reporting so far, is a fairly typical ransomware attack of things we've been seeing in the last 6-8 months, just happening in a really critical place. And so I don't think there was anything that we've seen, of the adversary going after the pipeline itself or anything that really gets outside of the norms, other than, it appears that, assuming some of the reporting's right, that a DarkSide affiliate has taken things to a new level of targeting. And so it is a little bit scary that we are seeing this in this place. And so it's not really a good trend to be seeing. And so, hopefully, we are seeing some response from various adversaries that make it look like they may be nervous about entering into this. And so I really do hope this doesn't become a trend.
Well, I agree with you. The thing that bothered me about it the most was that maybe at one time there were boundaries. Maybe there were things where people said, you know what, even bad guys have some boundaries. For them not to think that this would create some kind of chain effect where it affected other sectors of society, I don't think their public statement about "we didn't mean to hurt anybody" kind of thing is just not holding true. So let's cross our fingers and hope we don't see that trending anymore. But what are we seeing trending? What a great position for you guys to know these things. Any ransomware patterns in 2021 that might be emerging, different? We're thinking about incidents from Apple. Device cybersecurity endpoints. What's going on from your view with your knowledge database?
Yeah, so we're absolutely seeing some difference in trends in terms of what adversaries are doing on end systems, especially the last 6 months. It used to be that ransomware actors would get on a system, and the only thing they would do is encrypt all the files. They try to make it, they try to get into backups, try to delete anything to allow you to recover. But if you had really good backups and you kept them offline and you were able to keep them away from the adversary, it was going to be expensive, but you might be able to just recover your environment on your own without paying ransom or anything else. A disturbing trend we've seen in the last 6 months is more and more towards data theft, a lot more towards some of the espionage threats that we're a little bit more used to seeing from APT actors, that, the sort of things we've been defending against the last 10 years, but now moving into the ransomware space, where instead of pay a ransom and we'll give you a decryptor, you can get your files back, it's now pay a ransom or we're going to start leaking really sensitive information from inside your company. And that's some of what we just saw with Apple, where for one of their manufacturers being threatened. And we even have some ransomware groups now saying that they're not even going to bother encrypting files in the first place, that this has been so effective for them that that's going to be the model entirely. And that's something, obviously, good backups aren't enough to recover from your data being out there, your data being leaked. And so it does mean that there's even more importance now in stopping these from getting to that point in the first place.
So I heard somebody describe this as a triple extortion, right? So we had the file encryption, and then they say, you know what? If you don't do that, we're going to destroy your data. If you don't do that, we're going to reach out to the people who the data belongs to. We're going to call Security Guy TV and say, hey, Security Guy TV, you need to pay us now, right? So this is going to seem like a strange question, but to me, do you think that the bad guys have become dishonest? Because actually there is honor among thieves, right? This seems much more malicious instead of just a business venture, which is a good paying business venture. It seems like they're really becoming malicious by going to these second and third tiers of attack and basically blackmail.
I sort of hate to say this, but the everything we've seen is that they do operate in a lot of cases like businesses, where if people pay, they really do get a decryptor. The files really don't get leaked. There are some instances of groups out there that have done things like double encryption. So you decrypt your files and then you find out that you need to pay again to decrypt what was inside that. But the majority of cases, most of these organizations that are criminal organizations that are doing this seem to want to have a reputation that makes people want to pay. And so the majority of cases we are seeing them being dishonest in what they're doing, extortion, bad, and everything else, but legitimately decrypting the files if the ransom's paid.
Now, as a former police officer, I don't think I would ever thought I put these words in my mouth, but it's actually good news that the thieves are being honest. It's an oxymoron, but I think that's right? It's a business.
Yeah, it's very much a two-sided thing, but it's I don't think we've seen a lot of instances where people have paid and then things get leaked anyway.
All right, good news. Now, you guys have a lot of data. Let's talk about how you map it. When you look at these things, are you seeing attack patterns when you look at all this data and put it together? And are you able to help us with some defense strategies? Are the bad guys doing this the same way pretty much?
So that's actually a lot of what we do. We're looking at behaviors that are in common across adversaries operating in a lot of these different intrusions. And we're looking for what the commonalities are. We're looking for what adversaries are doing over time with an understanding that they're likely to do it again. So instead of just focusing on just the piece of ransomware, just the tools that they're using leading up to it, looking at those common patterns. So a lot of the work we're doing is sitting down and going, okay, dark side. In other intrusions they've done, they first got the domain controller, they brought out Cobalt Strike. They've gone through a series of activities that we can potentially look for that are beyond just being able to look for an IP address, being able to look for a hash on a specific piece of malware, find those common patterns. And we are seeing more and more reporting coming out on the activities that different ransomware groups are taking before they start encrypting. One upside of these adversaries starting to exfiltrate data is a lot of the knowledge that we've built up over the years focused on espionage actors on how to stop data going out the door starts to come back into play, looking for large outflows of data, looking for things scanning across lots of files. And so it's a bad thing in terms of resiliency that we've been able to rely upon a little bit, helping us out with recovering from the ransomware. But it does mean that we may have even some more patterns. And some of the common patterns that we've seen across multiple groups lately are coming from that exfiltration. So we're seeing multiple groups uploading to Mega as a site that they're keeping their exfiltrated files on. But we're continuing to see most of these groups leveraging Cobalt Strike as a tool to move around before they actually get to encrypting things. And then finally, last ditch, I mean, there are some patterns of behavior that we see right as the encryption's happening. We see adversaries start to delete shadow copies. We see some Microsoft backup tools engaged in most instances. And so you see those patterns, you need to be acting very quickly at that point. But there are commonalities that we're seeing as we look across a lot of these intrusions.
So it seems like detection is really not the problem. I started doing Black Hat about 7 years ago and kind of self-taught myself a lot of this stuff. And, we have the average network has 125 different security programs on there. It's a lot of information, a lot of bells and whistles going off. But ransomware kind of announces itself. Ransomware says, I'm here. Look at me. Give me some money, right? Are we focusing too much on detection and not, to earlier comment, about the very early patterns before it's detected or announced, right? Getting into those Microsoft triggers and things like that.
100%. You are going to detect ransomware when it starts encrypting because your files are encrypted. They want you to know about it so that you pay the ransom. And so it is a little bit different than most espionage threats. On the flip side, because the adversaries aren't worried about remaining undetected for really long periods of time, they're often noisier before they get to that ransom step. So, where a state actor may be breaking into a network, they want to keep their access over months or years without their presence ever being known. And, they may never want anyone to know what data they stole and information that they gained from it. Ransomware actors, a lot of these intrusions are weeks, sometimes days, sometimes, rarely down to something like an hour. But they know that they have a expiration time, so they're in a lot of cases noisier when they're on the network. The actual bar for being able to detect these guys before they get to the point of encrypting can even be a little bit lower than some of these other types of adversaries. So yeah, it is important to look at the precursors, look at activities that they're taking as they get into the network, and obviously trying to work on good hygiene and keeping them out in the first place. A lot of these groups aren't necessarily looking for really hard targets. Things like multi-factor authentication, things like really good detection on tools like Cobalt Strike, network segmentation. Some of the things that are kind of hygiene basics can make an organization not worth it for one of the ransomware actors. They'll move on to another place. It isn't like the espionage we've been dealing with forever, where there may be just one organization that has the exact information that an adversary is interested in. In this case, companies have money, and there's a lot of companies out there with money. And so, they can move on to the next profile of the next organization that, they think will pay out for ransomware to them.
All right. So it sounds like we have detection pretty well handled. Let's talk about the spread, which is actually before the response, maybe, right? I'm trying to understand this with my small Security Guy TV brain. Propagation is not real-time lightning speed necessarily. So if we have detection in place, we get on it right away. How fast does propagation happen? And do we have time to step in there and mitigate a lot of this damage if we're paying attention?
A lot of these are days and weeks. A lot of these, there is an opportunity where if the right thing is noticed, there's an opportunity to get in push out mitigations across various systems. Hopefully there's some sort of end system agent in place where you're going to be able to do a targeted remediation going after whatever their tool set is. Again, at the point of time when they're moving laterally, for a lot of places, that's Cobalt Strike being used. And so being able to really hone in on that. There are cases that people have seen where things are going from intrusion to ransomware in an hour. And that's, luckily that doesn't seem to be the norm, but there is some propagation that is really fast, where it is important to, have your response plans in place, be able to go from that initial detection to a response in a very short period of time.
So let's talk about a ransomware kill switch today as a concept only. Okay, so here's what I thought about it. If I'm a bad guy and I'm using ransomware and somebody has this sort of defense in place, I might try to flip around a kill switch model and use it against the company. So in other words, maybe I'm not encrypting everybody's files, but I'm turning off everybody's directory. Same kind of effect. Not as permanent, I get it, right? Is a ransomware kill switch idea something that's really workable and something that would really help mitigate a lot of these problems? Automation, I think, is really key here. You don't have time to sit there, or the personnel, by the way, to sit there and turn off all these directories and try to stop it as fast.
You do absolutely need sort of whatever your response tools are wired up and keyed to go from some central response. Yeah, in a lot of cases, that is going to be getting out targeted mitigations, but just being able to make sure you can regain control of all parts of your network at once is super important. We've absolutely seen over time with different types of adversaries, not necessarily related to ransomware, different tools used as denial of service. And we've seen everything from security tools being triggered intentionally. We've seen shutdowns being done across lots of different systems. And so, yeah, there is a range of activity that is, potentially doable across systems as leveraging our own pieces against ourselves as denial of service. And so, yeah, you absolutely need to have your security tools in place ahead of time and ready to go, so that you can be quickly deploying remediations as you're seeing this stuff. Or you're going to end up in a place where you're on the phone to everybody, and this happened in some of the faux ransomware incidents that have happened, like NotPetya, where organizations have had to get on the phone, call up everyone across the world, and say unplug now. And so stopping the spread the hard way. There were some companies that actually had a lot of success with that, where they were able to get the call chain up and running, and those power switches and plugs out of the wall effectively. But that's definitely not where you want to be. You'd much rather be understanding those early activities, looking at what techniques adversaries are using, getting in and getting your remediations pushed out automatically as quickly as possible.
Now, I'm interested in the data you look at. If you're drawing out any conclusions about, I'm not going to put you on the spot for percentages, but maybe just a feel. Are you finding, looking at this data, that most people are not prepared for this to some level, and then the next level is 20% prepared? Or is there some kind of hierarchy of people that are successful in mitigating, and the rest of them are just, that's it, they got to pay?
I don't think so the data we tend to look at tends to be finished reporting. We do a lot of aggregating of things that other people are looking at, which means that we don't tend to have as good of numbers for raw statistics. So, attack, we're looking at a lot of the different outputs from various companies that are doing threat reporting on ransomware. We don't really get to see anything deep down into sort of defensive postures at that level. So I'd hesitate to speculate, other than, it is definitely a wide swath that are, out there as ransomware targets. They're not having a problem finding new places to go. There are a lot of sectors that haven't really had to worry about this before. So it like the defense industrial base, the cleared defense contractors, the government. Those organizations have been worrying about computer security, espionage. Same with a lot of the really big companies out there for a long time. It's not new that you need to keep your network from being broke into, but there are a lot of these organizations that are now getting targeted by ransomware, who didn't seem to be on the hit list for organizations in the past. And what sort of information as a state are you going to steal from a hospital or a pipeline or organizations like that? And so we are seeing moving into different sectors where there's definitely places that hadn't been thinking about this as long, that now really do have to worry a lot more about them. They've got money in the bank, and that's all that's being targeted.
Now, I think you said you've been with MITRE 13 years. So I got a
Yep.
lot of white hair, but so you're approaching a Smithsonian level expertise, right? Especially in our business where people, come and go and move around and stuff. Here's what I'm concerned about, always have been, cybersecurity personnel. Do you think that severe personnel shortage, which some people say is between 1 to 2 million people, is that contributing to our demise a little bit here? And the reason I'm asking this, because I'm going to come back around to why automation is important. So anything you've been seeing trending with that our lack of personnel could be our Achilles heel here?
I'm seeing it, but I am seeing a huge focus in college and a huge interest in computer security, much more than I did 13 years ago. We're ramping up for internship season right now. I have a bunch of interns who are going to be working with the attack team across MITRE, coming from cybersecurity programs around the country, and so we are seeing a lot of the next generation coming up. I'm not sure it's the numbers that everyone wants. There definitely maybe some cases where demand is higher than supply. It's nice that we are seeing that in some cases in cybersecurity salaries, but we are seeing a lot of people interested in the space coming up in the pipeline. A lot of people coming from non-traditional backgrounds. So there's a lot of people coming into this space now who don't have a computer science degree, aren't coming from necessarily a technology standpoint, who are doing excellent work in computer security as well. So I don't think it's quite as doom and gloom as a lot of people feel it is. I think in some cases people do need to look a little farther afield from their previous hiring standards. People are coming from various different backgrounds, and taking a risk in some cases for building out our field.
Well, that's good to hear. It makes me feel a lot better about it. I go to Black Hat every year and I worry about this stuff because I don't know enough about it.
And you notice how many more people there are at Black Hat.
Yeah, no, that's true. Every year, I've been doing it 7 years, and I go in person, right? And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's fantastic. Now, let's talk about microsegmentation. I kind of get this concept. If we had some sort of kill switch, that kind of be the first thing you do is you would want to program, parts of your network so you can turn off little segments and make it automated. And then, you should be able to kind of make it up to a different level, green, yellow, orange, red, DEFCON 5, that kind of thing. Would this help stop lateral spread if we could stay just one step ahead of the encryption and shut it off as it approaches?
So it is a space where you end up in trade-offs. You over-segment your network, you start getting in the way of people actually getting work done. So you start putting up too many barriers in the middle of a environment, start preventing people from actually moving around to their development systems, from being able to get into the spaces they really need to work, access the data they need. There is a trade-off between where some segmentation is good. You don't want a network to be something in an adversary can just move across the entire place unstopped, unhindered, no active directory permissions preventing an adversary from getting around. But there's a downside too, that as you're adding barriers to connectivity that was put there to let people do their jobs. And so I work a lot with different developers. I hear the pain and screams sometimes as we put out various recommendations. We talk about better security in supply chains, in development systems. And so I do think we do need to be a little bit careful on how far we go and what barriers we put up along the way. I do think getting to where we're not having the flat Swiss cheese internal networks that we've got now, a little bit more towards sort of the zero trust mentality is good. But I want to make sure we don't break up stuff so far that nobody's actually able to get their jobs done.
Well, I think that's fair comment. I mean, that's the whole point of having the network is to make it easier to work, and you can't just shut it completely down. Now, let's talk about zero trust. I've been speaking to people this week at RSA. It's a little different definition for everybody. Slightly different. How does Adam define zero trust?
So Attack came out of a project that was looking at taking security to individual devices. So moving from boundary security, looking at firewalls, stuff like that, and moving to looking at watching behavior on individual systems between local firewalls, looking at activity coming out of sort of precursors to EDRs. And so we don't actually use zero trust as a term that much around Attack, but a lot of our focus over the years has been in that space. Most of Attack is describing activity at that end system endpoint level. So where we're looking at different ways that adversaries are acting as they get onto those end systems, and in turn, different ways that you can actually mitigate and defend against the adversaries as they get there. And so it's a mindset that when we were starting to look at it in 2013, 2014, before Attack was public, was really kind of unusual. That's not where you looked. You tossed your AV on an end system, you put your firewalls up, and so that was actually research for us. At that point in time, there was work going on in the government with HBSS and some other tools. But that push towards end system was sort of new at the time, and especially when Attack was first coming out. And so it's kind of been interesting to now be more the in vogue way of looking at systems, looking at what your defenses are on the individual systems, looking at access control at a device by device and system by system level. And so that's coming much closer in line to the sort of defensive mind stance that we've been talking about over the past 6 years.
Speak to me, not speak to me actually. Speak to me as if I were a CISO. How would I use MITRE Attack for practical purposes? And what am I going to get out of it if I come to MITRE and say, listen, I'm lost here. Give me the data. What am I going to draw out of that?
Actually, the biggest thing we tell people starting out with it is to start small. So an Attack is a relatively large framework at this point. We're describing over 300 different behaviors that adversaries are doing, and people sitting down and trying to digest that as a giant checklist tend to be sad. It tends to not go all that well. And so, first of all, starting out, look at the parts of Attack that matter to you. If you have a particular adversary who is going after particular different types of behaviors, start there in terms of looking at your defenses. Look at how say that APT 29 is been active against organizations like yours. Taking a look at what a actor like that has been doing in other places, how do your defenses stack up against that? And one of the more common ways that we see CISOs specifically leveraging Attack is as a way to communicate up to the organizations above them what their coverage stance looks like. So taking a look at what their response is going to be to different types of adversary behaviors, what it is that they're able to detect, what they can mitigate, where they're accepting risk, and leveraging that as a way of starting to map that out. But again, big advice for anyone on just getting started with it is don't try to do that in one bite. Take a look at things like what sorts of data sources you're already collecting, and what things that potentially get you for free. Looking at your threat intelligence at like which actors you have, and it's just something that is breaking attack down into more manageable chunks.
Excellent. Now, here's a $64,000 question. Let's say I gave you $64,000 and said, Adam, go out and build what you would like to see in an automated response for some sort of kill switch configuration. What components might you put into that, and what do you think would be necessary to really take this attack vector down? I mean, if we could be 90% effective, that's better than most people that are 0% effective in this.
Yeah, and so in a lot of cases, it is going to be down to if I'm just doing something automated, getting in malware protections that are going after some specific things. In a lot of cases, I'm probably going to want to use it as a force multiplier. A lot of the responses I'm going to want to take against ransomware, other malware intrusions, I am potentially going to want a human in the loop helping make a decision, but I want to be able to amplify their decision. I want to be set up to take whatever mitigation that is decided upon, whether it's focus on a particular hash or piece of malware, stopping in changing up file system permissions so that somebody doesn't have access to something, cutting off network connectivity for a specific host. I want to be set up to be able to push that sort of activity out across an enterprise as quickly as possible, when that decision is made. A lot of the things that you're likely going to want to do to stop a lot of these activities are potentially disruptive actions to the workforce. And so I am a little bit of a machine learning and AI skeptic. I think there's in a lot of cases where it is important to have the human, and so enabling that human to be able to automate and push out a lot of the decisions that they're making around these activities. Or in the case where I do have knowledge or on the specific tools, on specific behaviors that are necessarily going to be malicious, being able to set up the mitigations on that ahead of time, being able to prevent, catch, et cetera, the things that I know about, rather than just having them in some sort of intelligence database.
Adam Pennington, attack lead for MITRE, talk about ransomware security framework. Mr. Adam, thanks so much. I learned a lot. I love your presentation and your style. It's smooth, my friend. And you walk the walk and talk the talk. There's no doubt about that. And you happen to have a better microphone than I do. I will compliment you on that. Excellent. Excellent. It's a little industry thing we're sharing there. That's how it works. All right. Thanks for coming on, coming to RSA and speaking with Airgap. And I appreciate it, my friend, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me today.
All right. Very